The deep space scanner on the Valorian research vessel detected something unusual in the outer regions of their territory. A small ship was drifting slowly through the darkness, moving without power or purpose. The Valorians had explored thousands of worlds and encountered many species, but something about this vessel seemed different. The technology was crude, almost primitive compared to what they used. The ship's hull was made of metals that the Valorians had abandoned centuries ago. Inside that small vessel, there were people. Human people. Captain Marcus Hayes stood in the bridge of the colony ship, looking out at the vast emptiness of space. He was a tall man with strong shoulders and kind eyes that had seen many difficult journeys. Behind him, his first officer, Diana Richardson, studied the navigation console with growing concern. Diana was intelligent and careful, the kind of person who noticed small problems before they became big ones. Around them, the other crew members moved quietly through their tasks. There were scientists, engineers, doctors, and ordinary people who dreamed of building a new colony on a distant world. All of them had left everything they knew behind for this journey. The colony ship had been traveling for 18 months through space. The journey was long and boring most of the time, but it was also peaceful. People spent their days maintaining the ship, checking systems, and preparing for the life they would build on their new planet. Children played in the recreation areas. Scientists studied data from their sensors. Everything was routine and normal. Then the alarm started. The sensors picked up something unusual approaching the ship. It was large and fast, moving with purpose and power. Marcus immediately called all hands to stations. The crew members who had been relaxed and comfortable suddenly became alert and serious. Diana's fingers moved quickly across her console, trying to understand what was coming toward them. What appeared on their screens was unlike anything they had ever seen. The ship was enormous, sleek and beautiful, made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light. It was clearly advanced far beyond anything humanity had created. The vessel moved with perfect control and seemed to fill their sensors with readings they could not understand. Marcus tried to send a message. He spoke into the communication system, offering greetings in different languages, hoping someone on the other ship could understand. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice came through the speakers. It spoke in a language that was strange and musical, but somehow the colony ship's computers translated it into words they could comprehend. The voice was calm and polite. It explained that the Valorian research vessel had detected their presence. The message said that the Valorian scientists were very interested in the humans and their primitive technology. The voice assured them that no harm would come to them. They were being invited to join the research mission as subjects of scientific study. It was phrased very politely, as if the Valorians truly believed they were offering something wonderful. Marcus looked at Diana. Diana looked back at him. They both understood what this really meant, even though the words were gentle. They were about to be taken. The Valorian ship moved closer. The humans tried to run, tried to accelerate their engines, but nothing worked. The Valorians had disabled their systems with some kind of technology that made their ship powerless. The colony ship drifted helplessly as a beam of light emerged from the Valorian vessel. One by one, the crew members began to feel strange. Their bodies became light and floaty as if gravity had stopped working. They floated upward, unable to control themselves, pulled by an invisible force toward the Valorian ship. Marcus tried to grab onto something, but his hands passed through the handholds as if they were not real. He looked at Diana, and she looked terrified. Around them, crew members cried out and reached for each other. Children called for their parents, but nothing could stop what was happening. They were being taken. The light surrounded them completely. Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation all over his body. He could see the faces of his crew members around him, also floating, also helpless. Then everything went white and bright, and he could not see anything else. When the light faded and Marcus could see again, he was in a new place. He stood on a smooth floor made of some kind of hard material. The walls around him were transparent, and he could see other humans in rooms similar to his own. There were medical instruments in his room, equipment that he did not recognize. He looked down and saw that his clothes had been taken away and replaced with a simple white uniform. A door opened silently. An alien creature stepped into the room. The being was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer with different colors. It had large eyes that were kind but also cold and analytical. This was Scientist Krell, and he carried a device that looked like a medical scanner in his hand. Krell explained his purpose in a calm voice. He said that he was very interested in studying human physiology. He explained that the Valorians had eliminated pain from their own species long ago, and they now wanted to understand how other species experienced suffering. He said that the tests would be uncomfortable but not harmful. He said the humans should think of this as a great honor, to contribute to scientific knowledge. Marcus listened to every word. He asked about the rest of his crew. Krell told him that all 43 people had been brought safely to the research facility. They were all being cared for and kept in comfortable environments. But they were separated, placed in individual rooms unable to see each other or communicate. This, Krell explained, was necessary for the accuracy of the research. After Krell left, Marcus sat on the bed in his room and looked around. The walls showed images of a beautiful city outside, but he knew it was just a display. He was a prisoner, and so was everyone he cared about. He thought about Diana, wondering if she was scared, wondering if she was planning something like he was. He thought about the families on the ship, the children who had trusted him to lead them safely to a new world. In another room not far away, Diana was having similar thoughts. She was also wearing a white uniform. She was also looking at the equipment around her. She was also trying to figure out how they could escape from this place and save their people. But first, they would have to survive whatever tests the Valorians had planned for them. And they would have to do it without breaking, without giving up, and without losing hope that one day they would be free again. The Valorian research facility was enormous, full of laboratories and observation rooms and equipment that made beeping sounds and glowed with light. Scientist Krell and his assistant Mira walked through the corridors, discussing the exciting research that lay ahead. They had no idea that the beings they were about to study possessed a quality that would surprise them completely. They had no idea that humans, with their strange ability to endure pain and keep moving forward, would challenge everything they thought they understood about suffering and strength. The morning after his capture, Marcus was taken from his room by 2 Valorian guards. They did not speak to him or explain where they were going. Their skin was smooth and pale, and their movements were precise and careful, like machines that had learned to walk. Marcus followed them through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were white and clean and empty. There were no windows, no signs, nothing that told him where he was or how far underground they had taken him. The guard stopped at a large door. It opened silently, revealing a vast laboratory. The room was filled with strange equipment and devices that Marcus could not name. There were chairs with straps attached to them. There were tubes and wires and screens that displayed numbers and graphs. In the center of the room stood Scientist Krell, and beside him was his assistant Mira. Mira was younger than Krell, with curious eyes that studied Marcus with great interest. Krell greeted Marcus politely. He explained that the first set of tests would be simple and non-invasive. He said that Marcus should think of this as a medical examination, nothing more. He pointed to a large chamber made of transparent material. Inside the chamber, Marcus could see a thermometer and various instruments for measuring temperature. The test began. Marcus was placed inside the chamber, and Krell instructed him to stand still. The temperature inside the chamber started to drop. Marcus felt the cold air touch his skin, and he shivered slightly. Krell watched the readings on his instruments, taking notes with a device that floated in his hand. The cold grew more intense. It became harder to breathe. Marcus's teeth began to chatter and his body shook with tremors. Krell waited and watched. According to his research and his models of human physiology, Marcus should have lost consciousness within 20 minutes. He should have shown signs of severe distress much earlier. But Marcus stood there shaking and miserable but still standing. 30 minutes passed, then 40 minutes, then an hour. Krell's eyes widened slightly with surprise. Finally, Krell ordered the temperature raised. The chamber warmed and Marcus's body slowly stopped shaking. He breathed heavily and his lips were blue with cold, but he was still conscious. He was still aware. He had endured the test longer than Krell's models had predicted. Krell consulted with Mira. Mira suggested that maybe the Valorian equipment was not calibrated correctly. Maybe they needed to adjust the temperature lower to get accurate readings. Krell agreed, and they made notes in their records. They thanked Marcus for his cooperation and returned him to his room, where warm blankets and hot food waited for him. The next day, Diana was taken to a different chamber. This one was filled with heat instead of cold. The temperature inside rose slowly, degree by degree. It became uncomfortable. Then it became painful. Diana's skin turned red and sweat poured down her body. She found it hard to breathe because the air was so hot and dry. Krell watched from behind a protective barrier, monitoring her vital signs on screens. But Diana did not panic. She had learned in her military training long ago how to control her breathing. She slowed her heart rate down, consciously telling her body to stay calm. She focused on her mind, pushing the pain to the background, treating it as just information her body was sending her, not something that had to control her. She imagined she was somewhere else, somewhere cool and safe. The heat continued, but Diana endured it. Krell was confused. Diana should have passed out from heat stroke. She should have become delirious. Her body temperature should have spiked to dangerous levels. But none of these things happened. After 2 hours, he brought her out of the chamber. Diana collapsed to the ground, exhausted and weak, but she had survived the test. The experiments continued day after day. Kevin Barrett, the colony ship's chief engineer, was subjected to intense pressure. Heavy weights were placed on his arms and legs, pressing down with more and more force. Krell expected Kevin to cry out, to beg for the pressure to stop. But Kevin simply gritted his teeth and endured. His muscles burned and his bones ached. But he did not break. Amanda Foster, the medical officer, was exposed to extreme temperatures in rapid succession. One moment she was in a freezing chamber. The next she was moved to a burning hot one. The shock to her system should have caused her to lose consciousness or enter into shock. But Amanda's medical knowledge helped her understand what was happening to her body. And she coached herself through each transition, talking to herself quietly about what her body was experiencing and why it would survive. Lucas Coleman, a botanist who had joined the colony mission seeking peace and quiet in the natural world, found himself subject to electrical currents. Small amounts of electricity were passed through his body, starting at levels that caused discomfort and gradually increasing. Lucas had spent his whole life working with plants, avoiding conflict and pain. But he discovered that his mind was stronger than he had ever realized. He found a way to focus on something else, to let his consciousness step outside of his body and observe the pain without being destroyed by it. Krell and Mira began to notice a pattern. Every single human exceeded their expectations. Every single one of them endured more than any other species the Valorians had ever studied. The data they collected showed readings that did not match their models. Their computers kept indicating that the humans should have failed these tests, yet the humans continued to endure. In his private laboratory, Krell studied the data with growing frustration and fascination. The humans were not like the Valorians. The Valorians had eliminated pain from their biology 300 years ago through genetic engineering and medical science. They had thought this was the path to perfection. They had believed that species without pain were superior because they did not suffer. But now, looking at the data from the humans, Krell began to wonder if perhaps they had been wrong. The humans had pain, yes. They felt it and hated it and wanted it to stop. But they did not break under it. They adapted to it. They pushed through it. They continued moving forward even when their bodies screamed at them to stop. Mira came into his laboratory carrying a stack of data crystals. She was young and enthusiastic, and she believed deeply in the importance of their research. She asked Krell if the humans were as fragile as they had expected. Krell stared at her for a long moment before answering. He said that the humans were the opposite of fragile. They were remarkably, mysteriously, unexpectedly strong. Back in their separate rooms, Marcus, Diana, Kevin, Amanda, Lucas, and the other members of their crew lay in their beds, their bodies sore and their minds exhausted from the day's ordeals. They could not communicate with each other. They did not know if their friends had survived the tests or how many more tests they would have to endure. But something had changed inside each of them. They had discovered that they could survive more than they had ever believed possible. They had found strength in themselves that they did not know existed. They had learned that pain did not have to destroy them. It could not break them unless they allowed it to break them. And they were determined not to allow that to happen. Whatever the Valorians were testing for, the humans would not give them the satisfaction of breaking. They would endure, they would survive, and they would find a way home no matter what lay ahead. 5 weeks had passed since the humans arrived at the Valorian research facility. The tests had become more intense with each passing day. Krell and his team were determined to find the limits of human endurance. They created experiments that combined multiple forms of stress at the same time. They extended the duration of the tests until hours became entire days. They pushed every variable to new extremes, searching for that moment when the humans would finally break. But that moment never came. Marcus stood in a test chamber where extreme cold and intense pressure were applied simultaneously. His body was covered in ice crystals and heavy weights bore down on his shoulders and arms. The pain was unimaginable. Every muscle in his body screamed for relief. His vision began to blur at the edges. His heart raced so fast that he could hear it pounding in his ears like a drum. Any normal human would have collapsed long before this point. But Marcus did not collapse. Instead, Marcus did something that Krell had not anticipated. He closed his eyes and began to breathe slowly and deliberately. Marcus had learned meditation techniques as a young man, back on Earth from an old instructor who taught that the mind could control the body if properly trained. Marcus had not thought about those lessons in years, but now, in this moment of extreme suffering, those ancient teachings came rushing back to him. With each breath, Marcus felt his heart rate slow down. With each breath, he took control of his mind and separated it from the pain his body was experiencing. He imagined that he was not in this chamber at all. He imagined he was in a peaceful place, a place he had visited once long ago on a holiday. It was a beach with white sand and warm sun and gentle waves. He held that image in his mind with all his strength, using it as an anchor to keep his consciousness from drowning in the pain. When Krell finally ended the test, Marcus could barely move. His body was shaking and weak, and he could hardly stand. But he was still conscious. He was still aware. He had survived the combination of extreme cold and intense pressure. According to Krell's calculations, this should have been impossible. Diana learned what Marcus had discovered. When they were briefly in the same corridor, passing from their rooms to the test chambers, they exchanged only a few words. Diana whispered to Marcus, asking him how he endured. Marcus told her about the meditation, about separating the mind from the body, about using imagination as a tool to survive. Diana nodded, and when she went into her next test, she tried the same technique. Diana was placed in a chamber where the air was filled with a chemical irritant that burned her eyes, her nose, and her throat. The pain was sharp and immediate, like 1,000 tiny needles stabbing into her sensitive tissues, but Diana closed her eyes and focused her breathing. She had read many books about human psychology and resilience. She knew that pain was partly physical but also partly created by fear and anticipation. She told herself that this irritant could not permanently harm her. It was temporary. It would end. She would survive. Diana began to teach the other humans what she had learned. She shared her knowledge with Kevin and Amanda and Lucas and anyone else who would listen. In the test chambers, when they were alone, they learned to meditate. They learned to control their breathing. They learned to use their minds as tools to help their bodies endure suffering that should have been unbearable. The Valorian researchers did not understand what was happening. They noticed that the humans were enduring longer and longer in the tests. They thought perhaps the humans were building up tolerance to the pain, like how a muscle grows stronger with exercise. But it was something more than that. The humans were learning to control their minds. They were discovering psychological strengths they did not know they possessed. Something else unexpected began to happen as well. The Valorian technicians and guards who worked in the facility began to develop relationships with the humans. One of the guards was named Aaron, a young Valorian who had only recently been assigned to the research project. Aaron was assigned to monitor Marcus during many of his tests. Over weeks of watching Marcus endure pain with quiet dignity, Aaron began to feel something unexpected. He began to respect Marcus. One day, when Marcus was being escorted back to his chamber after a particularly brutal test, Aaron spoke to him. The guard's voice was quiet, and he looked around to make sure no one else was listening. Aaron said that he did not understand why Krell continued to push the humans so hard. Aaron said that the humans were clearly extraordinary and perhaps the tests should stop. Marcus thanked Aaron for his concern, and for a moment they were not captor and captive. They were two beings, sharing a moment of human connection. Amanda encountered something similar with a Valorian technician named Leia. Leia worked in the medical section of the facility, monitoring the humans' physical responses during tests. Leia was fascinated by Amanda's knowledge of human medicine and biology. Amanda, during breaks between tests, began to explain how the human body worked, how it adapted to stress, how it healed from injury. Leia listened with intense interest, asking many questions. For the first time in her life, Leia was learning about species from perspectives other than cold scientific observation. Kevin found an unexpected connection with a maintenance worker named Soren. Soren was responsible for keeping all the equipment in the facility functioning properly. Kevin, during breaks in his testing schedule, asked Soren questions about how the equipment worked. Soren, pleased that someone was interested in his work, began to explain the technology to Kevin in detail. Kevin's engineering knowledge helped him understand the systems quickly, and Soren was impressed by Kevin's insight and intelligence. Weeks turned into months. The test continued, but something had shifted in the research facility. The Valorians, particularly the younger ones like Aaron, Leia, and Soren, began to see the humans not as subjects but as people. They began to understand that these creatures from a distant world had families and hopes and dreams. They had personalities and strengths and abilities that extended far beyond their tolerance for pain. Krell and Mira began to notice the change in the attitudes of the staff. They called a meeting to discuss it. Mira expressed concern that the technicians were becoming too emotionally attached to the test subjects. She worried that this attachment might compromise the scientific accuracy of the research. But Krell said something that surprised her. He said that perhaps this emotional connection was part of what made the human so extraordinary. Perhaps this ability to form bonds with others, even with beings who had captured them and caused them suffering, was part of their strength. Mira looked at her mentor with new eyes. She began to understand that Krell was no longer looking at the humans as merely subjects of research. Krell was beginning to see them as remarkable beings, creatures whose ability to endure pain was connected to something deeper. It was connected to their capacity to love, to hope, to form relationships, to find meaning in suffering. In their separate chambers, the humans continued to endure the tests. They had discovered that pain could not break them. They had learned that the mind was stronger than the body. They had found ways to connect with each other through whispered words and glanced looks. They had even begun to form relationships with some of the Valorian staff members who guarded and monitored them. Marcus lay in his bed one night, his body aching from that day's tests, and he smiled. He had expected to break long ago. He had expected to reach a point where suffering would shatter his mind and destroy his will to live. But that point had never come. Instead, he had discovered something about himself and about his entire species. Humans did not break. They might bend. They might ache. They might cry in despair and want to give up. But they did not break, and that realization gave him hope that one day, somehow, he and his people would find their way home. Dr. Krell sat alone in his private laboratory late at night, studying the data collected over the past 3 months. The walls around him displayed hundreds of charts and graphs, each one showing the results of the pain tolerance tests conducted on the human subjects. Krell had spent his entire career studying how different species experienced pain and suffering. He had documented everything carefully, recorded every measurement, analyzed every response. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what he was seeing now. The data did not make sense. According to every model that Valorian science had developed, every prediction based on years of research, the humans should have failed these tests weeks ago. They should have broken mentally and physically. Their pain responses should have shown signs of catastrophic failure. But instead, the data showed something completely different. The humans were not breaking. They were adapting. They were growing stronger psychologically, even as their bodies suffered physically. Krell pulled up a longitudinal analysis, a graph that showed the progression of each human subject over time. The graph displayed a clear pattern. At first, when the tests began, the humans showed normal stress responses. Their heart rates increased. Their cortisol levels spiked. Their body temperature rose and fell dramatically. These were all signs of suffering and distress, exactly what Krell had expected to see. But over the weeks, something changed. The physical stress responses remained consistent, but something else shifted. The human's ability to maintain mental clarity increased. Their capacity to focus improved. Their emotional resilience grew stronger. The data showed that the humans were not becoming numb to pain. They were not developing a biological tolerance. They were doing something far more remarkable. They were learning to experience pain without being destroyed by it. Krell leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought about his own species, the Valorians. 300 years ago, the Valorian scientists had made a great discovery. They had found a way to remove pain from their genetic code. They had engineered out the ability to suffer. At the time, it had seemed like the greatest achievement in Valorian history. Pain was eliminated. Suffering was ended. The species had reached a new level of perfection. But as Krell reviewed the human data, he began to wonder if perhaps the Valorians had made a terrible mistake. What if the ability to experience pain was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be understood? What if suffering was not something to be avoided, but something that could transform a being into something greater? Mira entered the laboratory without knocking. She had worked with Krell for so many years that she did not bother with formal protocols when they were alone. She carried a data crystal in her hand, and her expression showed worry and confusion. She asked Krell if he had noticed the anomalies in the latest test results. She said that the data seemed impossible, and she wondered if perhaps their instruments had malfunctioned. Krell stood and walked to the large window that looked out over the Valorian capital city. The city was beautiful, filled with towers of crystal and buildings of pure light. The Valorian civilization was advanced far beyond most species. They had conquered disease. They had eliminated war. They had created art and music and literature of extraordinary beauty. But looking at that perfect city, Krell felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt doubt. Krell turned to Mira and asked her a question. He asked if she thought that a species which had eliminated all suffering was truly superior to a species that experienced suffering but endured it anyway. Mira was confused by the question. She said that eliminating suffering was obviously better than experiencing it. What other answer could there be? Krell walked back to his desk and pulled up the image of one particular human subject. It was Marcus Hayes, the captain of the colony ship. Krell had been studying Marcus longer than any of the other humans. He had watched Marcus endure test after test. He had observed Marcus grow stronger, not physically but mentally and emotionally. Krell explained to Mira what he had discovered. He said that Marcus and the other humans possessed something that the Valorians had lost. They possessed the ability to suffer and continue living. They possessed the capacity to face pain without running from it or hiding from it. They could feel despair and still find hope. They could experience failure and still keep trying. They could lose everything and still find reasons to endure. Mira listened, and slowly she began to understand what her mentor was saying. She began to see that strength was not only about avoiding pain. Strength was also about facing pain and walking through it. Strength was about continuing to live and love and hope even when circumstances seemed hopeless. Krell made a decision that night. He called a meeting with the Valorian High Council, the leaders of the entire civilization. The council members gathered in a great hall, sitting in seats that floated above the ground. Krell stood before them and presented his findings. He explained everything that his research had revealed about human physiology and psychology. He told them that the humans were not fragile creatures needing protection from pain. He told them that humans were extraordinary beings, whose ability to endure suffering and maintain hope was a form of strength that the Valorians had never possessed. He explained that by eliminating pain from their species, the Valorians had also eliminated something precious. They had removed the very thing that had driven their ancestors to survive impossible circumstances, to build civilizations, to create art and music and meaning in a cruel universe. The council members listened carefully. Some of them were skeptical. Others were intrigued. One elderly council member named Joran asked Krell a direct question. Joran asked if Krell was suggesting that the Valorians should reverse their genetic engineering and bring pain back into their species. Krell said no. He said that the Valorians had made their choice and reversing it would be impossible and perhaps unwise. But Krell said something else. He said that the Valorians could learn from the humans. They could learn what it meant to have resilience born from suffering. They could learn how to find hope in dark circumstances. They could learn how to value connections with other beings, connections that were strengthened through shared struggle and mutual understanding. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. The experiments on the human subjects would cease immediately. The humans would no longer be held in captivity. They would be treated with respect as remarkable beings deserving of admiration and study, not as test subjects to be examined and pushed to their limits. That night, Krell personally went to the chambers where the humans were being held. He walked through the white corridors with Mira beside him. They stopped at Marcus's chamber first. The door opened silently, and Marcus looked up from his bed, his body still aching from that day's tests. Krell spoke to Marcus with genuine respect in his voice. He apologized for the suffering that the humans had endured. He explained that he now understood that the experiments had been wrong. He said that he had learned more from studying the humans than they had learned from him. He said that the humans possessed qualities that were remarkable and worthy of respect. Marcus stood up slowly, his body weak but his spirit strong. He looked at this alien scientist who had caused him and his people so much pain, and instead of hatred, Marcus felt something unexpected. He felt pity for the Valorians. He pitied a species that had achieved so much technological advancement, but had lost something essential in the process. They had lost the ability to struggle, to suffer, and to find meaning in that struggle. Krell told Marcus that he and his people would be released. They would be given supplies and coordinates to reach the nearest human colony. But before they left, Krell asked if Marcus would be willing to speak with the Valorian Council. He asked if Marcus would be willing to share the human perspective on pain and suffering and resilience. Marcus agreed. As Krell left the chamber, he felt something changing inside himself. He had spent his life as a scientist, always objective and always analytical. But now, standing in the presence of this human being who had endured so much without breaking, Krell felt something that the Valorians had engineered out of themselves long ago. He felt the stirring of something new and old at the same time. He felt the beginning of true empathy, born not from logic but from witnessing the remarkable courage of another being. The Valorian transport ship descended slowly toward the landing platform. Inside the vessel, Marcus stood with the rest of the human crew. They had been given clean clothes to replace the white uniforms they had worn in captivity. They had been given food and water and medical treatment for their injuries. They had been treated with dignity and respect for the first time since their capture. But they were still leaving, still going home, still escaping this alien world and these alien beings. Marcus looked out the window at the Valorian city below. It was impossibly beautiful, filled with structures that seemed to defy gravity and geometry. The buildings glowed with their own light, and the streets were filled with Valorian citizens moving gracefully through their perfect world. Marcus thought about what Dr. Krell had told him. These beings had eliminated pain from their world, and in doing so, they had created something that looked perfect from the outside but was hollow at its core. Diana stood beside Marcus, watching the city pass below them. She was thinking about something different. She was thinking about the fact that the Valorians had been willing to torture them in the name of science. She was thinking about the pain they had endured for weeks. She was thinking about whether beings who could do such things deserved to be forgiven, even if they later expressed regret and released their captives. The transport landed gently on the platform. The humans were guided to a meeting chamber where the Valorian High Council was waiting. The council members sat in their floating chairs arranged in a semicircle. Dr. Krell stood to one side, and Mira stood beside him. Scientist Joran, the elderly council member who had questioned Krell during the vote, gestured for the humans to enter. Marcus stepped forward as the representative of his people. He was nervous. He had not given a formal speech since the colony ship was captured. He was not sure what he was supposed to say to these beings who had held him and his people prisoner. But then he thought about something that had happened during his final days in captivity. He thought about Aaron, the young Valorian guard who had spoken to him about stopping the tests. He thought about the respect that had begun to grow between them. Marcus began to speak. His voice was steady and calm. He said that he understood the Valorians had believed they were conducting important scientific research. He said that he understood they had no intention of causing permanent harm. But he also said that pain was not something to be studied from a distance like a laboratory specimen. Pain was something to be understood from inside, from the perspective of one who had felt it and endured it. Marcus told the council about his species and their history. He explained that humans had evolved on a world that was harsh and difficult. They had survived ice ages and droughts and diseases and wars. Every hardship they had faced had taught them something. Every pain they had endured had made them stronger. Pain, Marcus said, had shaped human culture and human values. It had taught them compassion because they understood suffering. It had taught them courage because they had faced dangers. It had taught them hope because they had learned that suffering always ended eventually. Diana stepped forward and spoke next. She talked about human medicine and healing. She explained that understanding pain was essential to treating illness and injury. A doctor who could not understand pain could not help patients recover. A society that did not know pain would not know how to comfort those who suffered. Diana spoke about how human doctors had developed treatments and medicines over thousands of years by learning to understand and work with pain, rather than trying to eliminate it completely. Kevin talked about human engineering and innovation. He explained that most human technology had developed because humans were trying to solve problems created by their environment and their physical limitations. The desire to reduce suffering, to make life easier and safer, had driven humans to invent better tools and systems. Kevin said that if humans had been born into a perfect world with no pain and no problems, they might never have developed the advanced technology they now possessed. Amanda spoke about human connection and relationships. She said that the strongest bonds between humans were formed when they suffered together and supported each other through that suffering. She explained that humans valued loyalty and friendship because they knew that other humans would stay beside them even when things were difficult. She said that relationships built only on pleasure and comfort were shallow compared to relationships built on surviving hardship together. Lucas talked about human art and creativity. He said that much of the most beautiful human music and literature and visual art came from people who had experienced deep suffering. Artists created to express pain and transform it into beauty. Writers told stories of struggle and triumph. Musicians composed songs that captured the full range of human emotion, from despair to joy. Lucas said that a species that had eliminated pain might create art that was technically perfect, but emotionally empty. The council members listened carefully to every word. Some of them nodded slowly. Some of them exchanged glances with each other. The elderly Joran leaned forward, his large eyes studying the humans with intense interest and growing understanding. When the humans finished speaking, Krell stood up. He said that the council had made a mistake long ago when they decided to eliminate pain from their species. But he said that this mistake did not have to define their future. Krell proposed something new. He proposed that the Valorians invite the humans to stay, not as captives but as partners. He proposed that humans and Valorians work together to study and understand resilience and suffering and the strength that comes from enduring hardship. But Marcus had a different proposal. He stood up again and addressed the council directly. He said that his people needed to return to their colony. They could not abandon their mission. But he suggested that the humans and Valorians exchange knowledge and researchers. He suggested that Valorian scientists could come to human worlds and study how humans lived with pain and built meaning from suffering. He suggested that human researchers could learn from Valorian technology and their advanced understanding of biology and medicine. Most importantly, Marcus said he suggested that the two species could become friends, not master and servant, not scientist and subject, but equal partners who respected each other and valued what each could teach the other. Marcus said that he believed friendship was possible even between species that had captured and tested each other, because friendship was built on understanding, not on perfection. The council voted again. This time they voted not on experiments but on a treaty. They voted to establish official contact between the Valorian Empire and the human colony. They voted to support the exchange of knowledge and researchers. They voted to build something new between two worlds. As the human colony ship prepared to depart, Marcus stood on the observation deck one final time. Mira came to stand beside him. She had chosen to be one of the first Valorian researchers to travel to the human colony to continue the exchange of knowledge. Mira said that she was nervous about leaving her world. She had never traveled to another planet before. She had never lived among aliens. She was afraid that she might not understand human culture or human ways. Marcus smiled and placed a hand on Mira's shoulder. He said that fear was natural when facing something new and unknown. But he said that fear was also an opportunity. He said that the Valorians could never truly understand pain by studying it from a distance. They would have to feel it themselves, to experience the vulnerability and uncertainty that came with living among other beings and trying to understand them. The ship's engines began to hum. The platform beneath their feet vibrated slightly as the massive vessel prepared to leave the Valorian world. Marcus and Mira looked out at the beautiful city one final time. The crystalline towers caught the light and threw it back into space in brilliant colors. Marcus thought about the weeks of pain and suffering he had endured in the research facility. He thought about the fear he had felt when he and his people were captured. But he also thought about what had come after. He thought about the strength he had discovered inside himself. He thought about the unexpected respect and connection that had formed between humans and Valorians. He thought about the possibility of a future where two very different species could learn from each other and grow together. The ship lifted off from the platform. The Valorian world grew smaller below them as they climbed into space. Marcus turned away from the window and walked toward the navigation center. Mira followed him. She was still nervous about her journey to the human colony, but she was also excited. She wanted to understand. She wanted to learn. She wanted to experience what it meant to live among beings who had taught themselves to endure suffering and find hope in darkness. As the human colony ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Valorian system behind, Marcus realized something important. The Valorians had tested human pain limits expecting to find creatures that would break, but instead they had discovered something far more valuable. They had discovered that humans did not break. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans transformed suffering into strength and meaning and hope. And in that discovery, both species had found the beginning of something precious and rare. They had found. The human colony ship traveled through space for 3 weeks before reaching its destination. The new world they were heading to was called Terra Nova, a planet with blue oceans and green forests and vast open spaces where humans could build a new home. As the ship descended toward the surface, Marcus looked down at the world below and felt something he had not felt in months. He felt hope mixed with relief. His people would finally be able to leave the confines of the ship. They would finally be able to plant their feet on solid ground and start building their future. But the colony ship was not alone anymore. Following behind it was a Valorian research vessel. On that vessel traveled Mira and 3 other Valorian scientists. They had volunteered to spend 1 year on Terra Nova, learning about human culture and human ways of living. In exchange, the humans had agreed to eventually send their own researchers to the Valorian homeworld. It was the beginning of something unprecedented in either civilization. It was the beginning of true cultural exchange between 2 very different species. Mira stood in the Valorian ship, watching the human colony ship land on Terra Nova below. She felt a mixture of emotions that she did not have names for. The Valorians had engineered away fear and anxiety long ago, believing these emotions served no purpose. But Mira was beginning to understand that fear served an important function. Fear kept you alert. Fear made you careful. Fear made you appreciate the moments when things went well. The Valorian research team landed in a separate location from the human colony, about 5 kilometers away. They had brought with them advanced technology and scientific equipment. They had also brought complete supplies because they did not know if human food would be suitable for their biology. But what they were most curious about was not the planet itself. They were curious about how humans lived, how they built communities, how they found meaning and purpose in their daily lives. Marcus organized a welcoming ceremony for the Valorian researchers. He assembled the human colonists in the central gathering area of their new settlement. They had built simple structures from local materials and grown gardens with seeds they had brought from Earth. The humans prepared food and music and displays of their art and culture. They wanted to show the Valorians what they valued, what brought them joy, what made human life worth living. When Mira and the other Valorians arrived at the gathering, they were surprised by what they saw. There was music playing, created by humans using instruments made from wood and metal and stretched animal hides. The sounds were not perfectly harmonious by Valorian standards, but they were complex and emotional and varied. Some songs were fast and joyful, some songs were slow and sorrowful, some songs told stories of loss and triumph and love. There was food prepared in ways that the Valorians had never encountered before. Humans had discovered that combining different ingredients could create flavors that were greater than the sum of their parts. They had learned that the act of preparing food together was a social ritual that brought people closer. They had learned that sharing a meal was one of the most important ways to express friendship and respect. There was art displayed on large panels. Humans had painted and drawn and sculpted images that expressed their feelings and their dreams. Some of the art showed scenes from Earth, places that humans had left behind. Some of the art showed the beauty of Terra Nova and their hopes for what they might build here. Some of the art showed the experience of suffering and surviving in the research facility. Those paintings were dark and difficult to look at, but they were powerful. One painting in particular caught Mira's attention. It showed a human figure in darkness, surrounded by pain and fear, but with light starting to shine from inside their body. The human figure looked broken but unbroken. It looked suffering but surviving. It looked hopeless but still holding on to hope. Mira asked Amanda about this painting. Amanda said that she had painted it during her recovery after they were released from captivity. She said that it represented the moment when she realized that pain could not destroy her, that no external force could break her spirit if she refused to let it break. Over the following weeks, the Valorian researchers began to integrate into the human colony. Mira worked closely with the medical team, learning about how humans treated illness and injury. She learned that human medicine was not about preventing all pain, but about managing pain and helping people recover their function and their quality of life. She learned that sometimes humans accepted pain as part of healing, understanding that the discomfort was temporary, but the benefits were permanent. Another Valorian named Soren worked with Kevin and the engineering team. Soren was fascinated by how humans solved problems with limited resources. The humans did not have access to the advanced Valorian technology, so they had to use creativity and ingenuity. They had to understand the basic principles of physics and engineering and apply them in practical ways. Soren realized that the humans were not inferior engineers because they lacked technology. In many ways, they were superior engineers because they had learned to do more with less. A third Valorian researcher named Kaya worked with the teachers in the human colony. There was a school where children were educated, and Kaya was amazed by how much time and energy humans invested in teaching their young. Humans did not simply pass down factual information. They taught children how to think, how to question, how to imagine, how to create. They taught them about human history, including the painful parts where humans had made mistakes and caused suffering. Humans believed that understanding the full truth of history, even the painful parts, was important for young people to develop wisdom and compassion. The fourth Valorian, named Tor, studied human governance and decision-making. Tor was surprised to discover that the human colony did not have a single leader who made all decisions. Instead, the humans used a system where many people had a voice in important decisions. Meetings were held where people could speak their opinions. Debates happened where people disagreed with each other but remained respectful. Decisions were made by consensus when possible, which meant that everyone agreed or at least accepted the decision, even if they did not completely agree with it. Tor asked Marcus why the humans spent so much time on this process. It would be more efficient, Tor suggested, to have a single leader make quick decisions. Marcus explained that efficiency was not always the most important thing. Marcus said that when people had a voice in decisions that affected them, they felt ownership and responsibility for the outcome. He said that when people were heard and respected, even if they disagreed with the final decision, they were more likely to support it and work together to make it succeed. One evening, Mira and Marcus sat together on a hillside overlooking the human settlement. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Mira had learned that sunsets were important to humans. They gathered to watch them, finding something peaceful and beautiful in the moment. Mira asked Marcus a question. She asked him if he hated the Valorians for what they had done, for the pain they had caused during the experiments. Marcus was quiet for a long time before answering. He said that he had been angry at first. He said that the experience had been terrible, and he would not wish it on anyone. But he said that he had come to understand that the Valorians had not been motivated by cruelty. They had been motivated by curiosity and a desire to understand. He said that when people did harmful things out of ignorance, forgiveness was possible if they were willing to learn and change. Marcus said something else. He said that the experience had also taught him something important about his own species. It had taught him that humans were far stronger and more resilient than they had realized. The humans had discovered inner strength during their ordeal. They had learned that they could endure suffering and survive it. That knowledge, Marcus said, was valuable. That knowledge had made the human colony stronger. Mira understood what Marcus was saying. She realized that her people, the Valorians, had lost something when they eliminated pain from their lives. They had lost the understanding that came from struggle. They had lost the growth that came from overcoming adversity. They had lost the wisdom that came from suffering and surviving. Mira said that she wanted to bring this knowledge back to her people. She said that she wanted to help the Valorians understand what humans had learned through thousands of years of facing pain and adversity. She said that perhaps humans and Valorians together could find a better way forward. They could combine human resilience and emotional depth with Valorian technology and innovation. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Marcus and Mira sat in the darkness watching the stars appear one by one in the sky. They were two beings from two very different worlds, but they had found common ground in their curiosity and their willingness to understand each other. The research that had begun as torture in a laboratory had transformed into genuine friendship and mutual respect on a distant colony world. And in that transformation, both species had discovered something they had not expected to find. They had discovered that being different was not a reason for fear or conflict. Being different was an opportunity to learn and grow and become something greater together than either species.